The moment my son took his first breath, my husband whispered 4 words that killed our marriage. My real family is waiting. I heard him clearly, standing by the hospital window, phone pressed to his ear, speaking to another woman while our newborn lay crying in his bassinet. He never held our baby. Not once. 3 days later, I discovered the truth. The secret second phone. The $2 million he had stolen. The woman who was supposedly carrying his child. But here is what Derek did not know. His mistress was lying to him too. She could never have children. She was not building a family with him. She was robbing him blind. And I was about to watch them destroy each other. What happened next cost me everything. My home, my savings. My son was ripped from my arms by police officers who believed I was the dangerous one. I had $127, no job, no lawyer, no way out. Derek had designed the perfect trap, but he made one fatal mistake. He underestimated a mother fighting for her child. This is the story of how I lost everything, uncovered a web of lies that went deeper than I ever imagined, and brought down the man who tried to erase me from existence. Stay until the end. Because the final twist? Even I did not see it coming. Value statement and lesson. Before we begin, I want you to know something important. This story is not just about betrayal. It is about survival. It is proof that your value is never defined by who fails to love you. It is defined by what you choose to do next. If you have ever felt trapped, invisible, or powerless, this story is for you. Because sometimes the person who saves you is the one staring back in the mirror. Meaning of the story. The ancient Stoics taught us that we cannot control what happens to us, but we can always control how we respond. Madison could not control her husband's betrayal. She could not control the lies, the manipulation, or the system that turned against her. But she could control her courage, her choices, her refusal to give up. And that made all the difference. Remember this. What stands in the way becomes the way. Your obstacles are not the end of your story. They are the beginning of your transformation. The moment my son took his first breath, my husband whispered 4 words that killed our marriage. My real family is waiting. I heard them clearly. The delivery room was quiet, except for the beeping monitors and my own ragged breathing. The nurses were cleaning up. The doctor had stepped out. And Derek, my husband of 5 years, stood by the window, with his phone pressed to his ear, speaking words that shattered everything I thought I knew about my life. My name is Madison Cole. I was 34 years old when I gave birth to my son at Chicago Memorial Hospital on a cold Tuesday in February. I had been in labor for 14 hours. I had called Derek 23 times. He arrived 2 hours after our baby was born, smelling like expensive cologne that was not his usual scent, with a long blonde hair clinging to his jacket collar. I noticed it immediately. Wives always notice. We just choose when to acknowledge what we see. Derek did not rush to my side. He did not kiss my forehead or squeeze my hand or cry tears of joy at meeting his firstborn child. Instead, he glanced at the bassinet where our son lay, swaddled in a hospital blanket, then turned to the window and took a phone call. That is when I heard it. Yeah, I am stuck here. She finally had it. I will be home soon. To you, my real family. The words hung in the sterile air like poison. I tried to convince myself I had misheard. The medication, the exhaustion, the trauma of childbirth. Surely my husband of 5 years, the man who had promised to love me until death, had not just called another woman his real family while standing 10 feet from his newborn son. But I had not misheard. Derek ended his call and finally approached me. His eyes were cold, distant, like he was looking at a stranger rather than the woman who had just given him a child. He did not say congratulations. He did not say, I love you. He did not say, our son is beautiful. He said, I have to get back to the Riverside project. There is an emergency. There was no emergency. I knew it then, even though I did not want to admit it. The Riverside project was his excuse for everything. Late nights, missed dinners, forgotten anniversaries. For 3 years, I had believed him. I had trusted him. I had given up my career as a high school art teacher because he said we did not need 2 incomes, because he said he wanted me to focus on our future family, because he said he would take care of everything. What he really meant was that he wanted me dependent, isolated, trapped. The nurse, a no-nonsense woman named Brenda with gray streaks in her hair and kind eyes that had clearly seen too much, noticed the tension. She looked at Derek's collar, then at me, then back at his collar. Sir, she said loudly, you have got a little something there. Looks like you fought a tube of lipstick and lost. Derek's face flushed red. He touched his collar instinctively, then glared at Brenda with a look that would have made most people shrink. But Brenda just raised an eyebrow and continued checking my vitals like she had not said anything at all. I almost laughed. Almost. It was the first crack in my denial. Derek left 20 minutes later without holding his son, without kissing me goodbye, without even looking back. I lay in that hospital bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to my newborn's soft breathing, and I felt something I had never felt before in my marriage. Clarity. My grandmother used to tell me something when I was young. She would sit me on her knee, brush my hair back from my face, and say, Madison, when someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. I had not listened. For 5 years, Derek had shown me exactly who he was. The late nights he could not explain. The passwords he changed monthly. The way he flinched when I picked up his phone. The slow, systematic way he had separated me from my friends, my family, my independence. I had believed his excuses because believing was easier than facing the truth, but now, holding my son for the first time, I could not look away anymore. The next morning, I was discharged. Derek sent a car service instead of coming himself. The driver helped me into the back seat with my baby and my small bag of belongings. And we drove through the gray Chicago streets toward the house I had once called home. It did not feel like home anymore. Our house was in Oak Park, a suburb that looked perfect on the surface. Tree-lined streets, well-maintained lawns, neighbors who waved politely but never got too close. Derek had chosen it specifically for the image it projected: successful, stable, respectable. The driver pulled into the driveway. I thanked him quietly and carried my son inside. The first thing I noticed was the nursery. Derek had promised to finish it before the baby came. He had promised for months. But when I pushed open the door, everything was exactly as I had last seen it. Paint cans unopened, crib still in its box, changing table unassembled. He had not done anything. I stood in that empty room, holding my newborn son, and I understood something clearly for the first time. Derek had never intended to be a father, not really. This baby, our baby, was just another accessory to him, another box to check on his list of things that made him look successful. I closed the nursery door and carried my son to the master bedroom. I would figure out sleeping arrangements later. Right now I needed to think. That is when I saw the credit card statement on the kitchen counter. Derek must have left it out by accident. He was usually so careful about hiding his finances from me. But there it was, printed in black and white. A record of his betrayal. A jewelry store, $4,200. A boutique hotel downtown, $890. A lingerie shop, $340. None of these purchases were for me. I knew because I had not received jewelry or lingerie, or romantic hotel stays in over 2 years. I knew because Derek barely touched me anymore, and when he did, it felt like obligation rather than desire. My hands trembled as I picked up the statement. There had to be an explanation. There had to be, but there was not. I walked to Derek's home office, still carrying my son against my chest. His laptop sat open on the desk, screen dimmed but not locked. I should not have looked. I knew I should not have looked. I looked anyway. The messages were right there, open in a chat window with someone saved only as V. She is so pathetic, Derek, had written. Cries about everything. You are the only one who gets me. After the quarter ends, I will file. She will not fight. She has nothing without me. I scrolled up, my vision blurring with tears I refused to let fall. There was a photo. Derek and a stunning blonde woman at a rooftop bar, his hand resting on her stomach. The caption reading, "Cannot wait for our little one." The room spun. He was having an affair. He was planning to leave me, and the other woman, whoever she was, might be carrying his child. Everything I had given up, my career, my friends, my independence, had been for nothing. He had been planning his escape the entire time, making sure I had nowhere to go, no resources to fight, no way out. I sank to the floor of his office, my back against the cold wall, my newborn son sleeping peacefully against my chest, completely unaware that his mother's world had just collapsed. I sat there for a long time, crying silently, feeling smaller than I had ever felt in my life. But somewhere beneath the pain, beneath the betrayal, beneath the crushing weight of everything I had just discovered, a tiny spark flickered. Not yet, but soon. Derek came home at 2 in the morning. I was waiting for him in the living room, sitting in the darkness, with only the streetlight filtering through the curtains. My son slept in the bassinet beside me, the only piece of baby furniture I had managed to set up myself. The front door opened. Derek walked in, humming softly to himself, clearly not expecting me to be awake. He flipped on the light and stopped when he saw me. "Madison," his voice was cautious. "Why are you sitting in the dark?" I did not answer immediately. I just looked at him, really looked at him for the first time in years. The man I had married had been charming, attentive, full of promises about the life we would build together. The man standing before me now was a stranger, wearing my husband's face. "Who is V?" I asked quietly. Derek's expression flickered, just for a second, but I saw it. Surprise, then calculation, then carefully constructed confusion. "What are you talking about?" I stood up slowly, my body still aching from childbirth, but I refused to let him see me as weak. "I saw the messages, Derek, on your laptop. I saw the credit card statements. I saw the photo." He was quiet for a long moment. I watched emotions cycle across his face, each one more disturbing than the last. Anger, contempt, and finally something that looked almost like relief. "Fine," he said. "You want the truth. I will give you the truth." He loosened his tie and walked to the kitchen, pouring himself a glass of whiskey like we were having a casual conversation, rather than dismantling our entire marriage. "Her name is Vanessa. We have been together for 2 years. She understands me in ways you never could. 2 years, 2 years of lies, 2 years of looking me in the eyes and promising nothing was wrong. 2 years of making me feel crazy for questioning his late nights and distant behavior. Is she pregnant?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Derek took a long sip of his whiskey before answering. "Yes, she is carrying my child, the one I actually want." The words hit me like a physical blow. I had to grip the back of the couch to stay standing. "And our son?" I managed. "What about him?" Derek glanced at the bassinet with an expression that turned my blood cold. There was no love there, no connection, no paternal instinct whatsoever. He looked at our newborn baby like he was looking at an inconvenience. "That was your idea," he said flatly. You trapped me with this pregnancy. Do not pretend otherwise. I told you, I was not ready for kids. You went off birth control anyway. That is not true, I protested. We agreed together. You said you wanted. I said what you needed to hear. Derek cut me off. Because that is what I do. I say whatever keeps things running smoothly. But Vanessa, she actually gets me. She supports my ambitions. She does not nag me about nursery colors or cry about her feelings every 5 minutes. He set down his glass and looked at me with something close to pity. You want the real truth, Madison. Here it is. You were a placeholder, a starter wife, someone to cook and clean and look good at company events while I built something real. Vanessa is my future. You are just a receipt from my past. I should have crumbled. Part of me wanted to, but something else rose up instead. Something I did not know I still had. Then I want a divorce, I said. Derek laughed. Actually laughed. With what money? With what lawyer? You have not worked in 3 years. The house is in my name. The cars are in my name. You signed a prenup, remember? You get nothing. I remembered the prenup. I remembered sitting in that lawyer's office, young and in love, and so certain that Derek would never hurt me. I remembered signing without really reading because he assured me it was just a formality, just something his family required, nothing that would ever matter. It mattered now. Derek walked past me toward the bedroom. Stay if you want, he said over his shoulder. Leave if you want. Either way, I do not care. Just do not embarrass me publicly. I have a reputation to maintain. The bedroom door closed behind him. I stood alone in the living room, my newborn son sleeping peacefully, completely unaware that his mother had just been erased from his father's life like she never existed. I had 2 choices. I could collapse. I could cry and beg and hope Derek would change his mind, would choose us, would suddenly become the husband and father he had never actually been. Or I could fight. I did not sleep that night. Instead, I sat in the darkness and made a plan. I had $127 in my personal checking account. I had no job, no recent work history, no professional references. I had a newborn baby who needed formula and diapers and a mother who could actually function. I had almost nothing, but almost nothing is not nothing. The next morning, while Derek showered, I searched through his office. I found the prenup in a locked filing cabinet. The key was hidden in his desk drawer, taped to the underside where he thought I would never look. I read every word this time. The agreement was brutal. In the event of divorce, I would receive no alimony, no share of his business assets, and limited claim to any property acquired during the marriage. I had signed away my future without even realizing it. But one clause caught my attention. The prenup would be voided in the event of proven infidelity or fraud. Infidelity. Derek had handed me a weapon without knowing it. I needed evidence, real evidence. Not just screenshots that could be dismissed as fake. Not just credit card statements that could be explained away. I needed something undeniable. But first, I needed to get out of this house. I waited until Derek left for work, then I packed a small bag. Diapers, formula, a few changes of clothes, but each for me and the baby. My driver's license, my phone charger. I loaded everything into my car. The old Honda that Derek had let me keep because he said it was not worth selling. He had meant it as an insult. Now it was my escape. I drove away from the Oak Park house without looking back. My first stop was a women's shelter I had found online the night before. It was located in a nondescript building on the south side, the kind of place you would drive past without noticing unless you knew what it was. The intake worker was a kind woman named Gloria with reading glasses perched on her nose and a voice that radiated compassion. "How can we help you, honey?" she asked. I told her everything: the affair, the other woman, the prenup, the way Derek had systematically stripped away every support system I had. Gloria listened without interrupting, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, she sighed heavily. "We can help with temporary housing," she said. "But there is a process. You need documentation, proof of residence, income verification, your son's birth certificate." "I do not have any of that," I admitted. "My husband controls all the paperwork." Gloria nodded like she had heard this 1,000 times. "There is also a waiting list," she continued gently. 3 weeks minimum for emergency housing. Is there anywhere else you can stay tonight?" I sat in my car in the shelter parking lot for a long time after that conversation. My baby cried. The heater struggled against the February cold. I watched my breath fog the windshield and wondered how I had ended up here. Derek had designed this. Every carefully controlled piece of our marriage had led to this moment. He had made sure I had no escape route, no safety net, nowhere to turn. But he had forgotten one thing. I still had family. My phone buzzed, a text from my sister Rachel in Milwaukee, responding to the messages I had sent the night before. "Maddie, what is going on? I just saw your texts. Call me immediately." I called her. I told her everything. And Rachel, my older sister, who had always been there for me even when I pushed her away during my marriage, said the words I desperately needed to hear. "Come to Wisconsin tonight. Stay as long as you need. We will figure this out together." I cried for the first time since leaving the house, not from sadness, but from relief. I had somewhere to go. I had family. I pulled out of that parking lot and pointed my old Honda north toward Milwaukee, toward my sister, toward the first glimmer of hope I had felt in years. I drove through the night, my newborn secured in his car seat, watching the Chicago skyline shrink in my rearview mirror. I was not running away, I told myself. I was running toward something better. I had no idea that the hardest part was still ahead. Rachel's apartment in Milwaukee was small but warm, a one-bedroom unit on the third floor of an old building with creaky stairs and radiators that clanked through the night. It was nothing like the Oak Park house with its manicured lawn and expensive furniture. It felt more like home than anywhere I had lived in years. My sister was 7 years older than me, divorced, working as an office manager for a dental practice. She had always been the practical one in our family. When our mother died 2 years ago, Rachel handled the funeral arrangements while I fell apart. When I married Derek and slowly disappeared from family gatherings, Rachel kept calling, even when I stopped answering. She deserved better than a sister who showed up on her doorstep at 3 in the morning with a newborn and a broken marriage. But she never made me feel that way. "You are staying as long as you need," Rachel said firmly on my first night there, setting up a makeshift sleeping area in her living room. "And we are going to figure out how to take that cheating bastard for everything he has got." I almost smiled. Almost. For 3 days I rested. I fed my baby. I let myself feel something other than panic for the first time since giving birth. Rachel took time off work to help with the nighttime feedings. She made terrible coffee that somehow tasted better than anything I had drunk in years. She listened when I needed to talk and sat in comfortable silence when I did not. On the second day, she attempted to cook spaghetti and somehow produced noodles that were both crunchy and soggy at the same time. "How is this physically possible?" I asked, staring at my plate. "It is a gift," Rachel said seriously. "Gordon Ramsay would cry." I laughed. Actually laughed. The sound surprised both of us. That night, lying on Rachel's couch with my son sleeping beside me, I let myself imagine a future. A small apartment of my own, a part-time job, slowly rebuilding the life Derek had stolen from me. It felt possible. It should have been a warning sign that things were going too well. On the fourth morning, someone knocked on Rachel's door. I was in the kitchen, warming a bottle, when I heard the voices, Rachel's confused tone, a man speaking formally. The words that made my blood freeze. "We are looking for Madison Cole." I walked into the living room, my baby against my chest, and found two police officers and a woman in a gray pantsuit standing at the threshold. "Madison Cole," one of the officers said. It was not a question. "Yes." He handed me a document. "We have a court order. There are allegations of child endangerment, fleeing across state lines without the father's consent. You need to come with us." The room tilted. I gripped Rachel's arm to stay standing. "What are you talking about?" I managed. "I am his mother. I would never hurt him." The woman in the pantsuit stepped forward. Her face was professionally neutral, impossible to read. "Ma'am, we are not accusing you of abuse," she said. "But the father has filed an emergency custody motion claiming you are mentally unstable. He alleges you fled with the child during a postpartum psychotic episode without his knowledge or consent. Until a judge reviews the case, the child must be placed in temporary custody." "No." The word came out broken. I heard Rachel shouting something, saw the officers moving forward, felt hands reaching for my baby. "No, no, no. Please, you cannot. He is lying. I am not unstable. I am his mother. Please." But the law does not care about pleas. They took my son from my arms. The sound I made was not a scream. It was something worse, something animal, something that came from a place so deep I did not know it existed. Not existed. Rachel caught me as my knees gave out. She held me on the floor of her apartment while I sobbed so hard I could not breathe. The officers left. The social worker left. My baby left. And I understood, with devastating clarity, exactly what Derek had done. He had not just cheated on me. He had not just abandoned our son. He had weaponized the entire legal system against me. He had painted me as the danger. He had documented my crying as evidence of instability. He had used my postpartum vulnerability as a weapon. And now my son was gone. Rachel held me for a long time. When my sobs finally quieted to shuddering breaths, she gripped my shoulders and forced me to look at her. "We are going to fight this," she said fiercely. "Do you hear me? We are going to fight." "How?" I whispered. "He has the money. He has the lawyers. He has everything." "You have the truth," Rachel said, "and you have me. That is a start." I spent the next 3 days in a fog of grief and terror. I could not eat. I could not sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt phantom weight in my arms where my baby should have been. Rachel researched custody lawyers. She made phone calls. She kept me alive when I wanted to disappear. On the fourth day, she found me a free legal consultation. "His name is Garrett Walsh," Rachel said. "He is a legal aid attorney. He has a reputation for taking on powerful people. And apparently, he has some kind of history with Derek." "History with Derek," I repeated numbly. Rachel shrugged. The receptionist would not say more, but she seemed almost excited when she heard who the case was against. I did not have the energy to feel hope. But I went to the consultation anyway because I had no other options. Garrett Walsh's office was in a converted storefront on the north side of Chicago. I had driven back specifically for this meeting, leaving Rachel behind with promises to call every hour. The waiting room was small and cluttered with legal files. The receptionist offered me weak coffee in a foam cup. I waited for 40 minutes past my appointment time. When Garrett finally emerged to greet me, he was not what I expected. He was in his early 40s, with tired eyes and a coffee-stained tie. His suit was rumpled, his hair needed cutting, and he looked like he had not slept properly in weeks. He was nothing like Derek's polished lawyers with their expensive watches and practiced smiles. Somehow, that made me trust him more. You are Madison Cole, he said. Derek Cole's wife. Soon to be ex-wife, I corrected. If I survive this, he led me into his office, which was even more cluttered than the waiting room. Files covered every surface. A half-eaten sandwich sat forgotten on a stack of legal briefs. Tell me everything, he said. So I did. When I finished, Garrett was quiet for a long moment. He steepled his fingers, staring at a point somewhere above my head. Then he said something that changed everything. I know your husband, or rather, I know what your husband does to people. What do you mean? Garrett leaned back in his chair. 8 years ago, Derek Cole screwed over my brother's construction business, stole a contract through bribery and kickbacks, paid off an inspector to fail my brother's safety certification. My brother lost everything, his business, his house, his marriage. He nearly lost his life. I stared at him. I did not know. No one does. Derek is very good at covering his tracks. He studied me carefully. I have been waiting a long time to see him face consequences. You might be my chance, and I might be yours. I should have been suspicious. This was too convenient. A lawyer with a personal vendetta against my husband, appearing exactly when I needed help. But something in Garrett's eyes told me his anger was real, his pain was real, and his desire to take down Derek Cole was very, very real. Why should I trust you? I asked. Everyone Derek knows has an angle. Fair enough, Garrett said without offense. Do not trust me. Verify everything I tell you. But ask yourself this, if I wanted to hurt you, why would I approach you in a public courthouse, with security cameras everywhere, offering to help for free? He had a point. Verify first, I said slowly. Then trust. He smiled for the first time. Smart woman. That attitude might actually keep you alive. I spent the next 3 days doing exactly what I said. I called the State Bar Association. I verified his license. I researched his past cases. I contacted 2 of his former clients, women who had gone through divorces against wealthy husbands. Everything checked out. On the 4th day, I called Garrett and officially became his client. This is not going to be easy, he warned me. Derek has money, connections, and no conscience. He has already proven he will lie to the court. He has already proven he will use your own child as a weapon. I know, I said, but I have something he does not. What is that? I am fighting for my son. He is fighting for his ego. I have more to lose, which means I have more reason to win. Garrett was quiet for a moment. Then he laughed, a surprised sound that seemed to catch him off guard. Madison Cole, he said, you might actually have a chance. It did not feel like a chance. It felt like desperation dressed up in borrowed courage. But I would take it. Garrett laid out the situation with brutal honesty during our first strategy session. Derek filed the custody motion, claiming you have postpartum psychosis, he explained. He submitted a letter from a psychiatrist named Dr. Helen Marsh diagnosing you as a danger to your child. I have never seen a psychiatrist in my life, I protested. I know. Garrett slid a document across the desk. Dr. Helen Marsh is Vanessa Bennett's aunt. I stared at the paper. The betrayal kept finding new depths. They fabricated a diagnosis. They fabricated everything, Garrett confirmed. But here is what Derek does not know. I have been quietly building a case against him for years. He opened a thick file folder and spread documents across his desk. Tax irregularities in his construction company. Safety violations at 3 different project sites. And this. He pointed to a newspaper clipping from 2019. A worker named Marcus Thompson died at one of Derek's sites, ruled an accident, but I have witnesses who say Derek cut corners on equipment to save money. The safety harness failed because it was past its inspection date. A man died, I whispered. And Derek walked away without consequences. Garrett's jaw tightened. I could never prove it because no one would testify against him. His employees are scared. His partners are complicit. But you, Madison, you were his wife. You have access to things no one else does. Documents, conversations, patterns. The weight of what he was suggesting settled over me. You want me to investigate my own husband. I want you to help me find the truth, Garrett said. And then I want us to use that truth to destroy him. It was a dangerous proposition. If Derek caught me, if he found out what I was doing, I would lose any chance of getting my son back. I could end up in prison myself. But if I did nothing, I would lose my son anyway. What do I need to do? I asked. Garrett smiled grimly. Tell me everything you remember about that house. I spent hours reconstructing the details of my life with Derek. The layout of his home office, the filing cabinet where he kept important documents, the safe I had seen him open but never accessed myself. The combination, Garrett said. Do you remember it? I closed my eyes, reaching back through memories I had tried to forget. He opened it in front of me. Once, I said slowly. When we first moved in, he thought I was not paying attention, but I was. I was always paying attention, even when he thought I was invisible. The numbers came back to me. My birthday. Reversed. April 18th became 814. Derek had used my birthday as his safe combination. The irony was almost poetic. Garrett and I developed a plan. Derek golfed every Saturday morning with clients. According to my sister's social media research, Vanessa attended a yoga class at the same time. The house would be empty for approximately 3 hours. I still had a key. Derek's arrogance meant he had never changed the locks. This is risky, Garrett warned. If he catches you, it is breaking and entering. Everything we are building collapses. I know, I said, but he took my son. I will take his secrets. Rachel insisted on being my getaway driver. She drove down from Milwaukee the night before, arriving at midnight with a thermos of coffee and a nervous energy that was almost comical. If we get caught, she said as we sat in her car outside Derek's house that Saturday morning, I am going to prison. I cannot go to prison. I do not even like orange. Just keep the engine running, I told her, and text me if you see his car. I approached the house like a stranger, which I suppose I was now. The key still worked. The alarm code was still our anniversary date. Another bitter irony. Inside, everything looked exactly as I had left it. The unfinished nursery, the expensive furniture, the cold, perfect surfaces that had never felt like home. I moved quickly to Derek's office. The filing cabinet was locked, but I knew where he hid the key. The safe combination worked on the first try. Inside, I found exactly what Garrett had predicted. The insurance folder. Documents showing Derek had diverted $2.3 million from company accounts into Vanessa's name over the past 18 months. A burner phone with text messages discussing payoffs to a city inspector after Marcus Thompson's death, and something unexpected, a prenuptial agreement. But not the one I had signed, a different version, an earlier draft. I read it quickly, my hands shaking. This version gave me 40% of marital assets in the event of divorce. No restrictions, no clauses about infidelity, voiding the agreement. Just a straightforward, fair division. I looked at the date. It was 1 week before I had signed what I thought was our final prenup. Derek had switched the documents. He had given me a fraudulent agreement to sign, one that stripped away all my rights, while hiding the original that would have protected me. I photographed everything, every document, every text message, every piece of evidence I could find. My phone buzzed. Rachel. Car approaching. Not sure if it is him. Get out now. I shoved everything back into the safe, closed it, and ran. I made it out the back door just as a car pulled into the driveway. Through the fence slats, I saw it was just a delivery truck, but my heart did not stop racing until I was back in Rachel's car, driving away from that house for what I hoped was the last time. Garrett was ecstatic when I showed him what I had found. "This is it," he said, spreading the documents across his desk. "Financial fraud, bribery, falsified documents. The prenup alone is enough to void the custody claim. We have got him." He filed emergency motions with the court. The judge agreed to review the new evidence. A hearing was scheduled for the following Monday. For the first time since my son was taken, I allowed myself to hope. "We are going to get him back," Rachel said, on the drive back to her apartment. "This is almost over." I leaned my head against the car window, watching Chicago's skyline pass by. "Almost," I agreed. I should have known better than to celebrate early. The knock came on Friday night. I was staying at a budget motel near the courthouse, too nervous to make the drive back to Milwaukee before Monday's hearing. The room smelled like stale cigarettes and industrial cleaner. The bedspread had a suspicious stain I tried not to think about, but it was private. It was anonymous. It was safe. Or so I thought. When I opened the door, expecting the pizza I had ordered for dinner, I found Vanessa Bennett standing in the hallway. She was exactly what I had pictured from the photographs. Tall, blonde, impeccably dressed in a cream-colored coat that probably cost more than my car. Beautiful in a sharp, calculating way that made you think of knives hidden in flower arrangements. "Hello, Madison," she said. Her voice was calm, pleasant even, like we were meeting for brunch rather than confronting each other in a dingy motel corridor. I tried to close the door. She caught it with her hand. "That would be rude," she said, "and we have so much to discuss." She walked past me into the room without invitation. I stood frozen, watching her examine my sparse belongings with obvious disdain. "This is where you are staying," she said. "Goodness, I knew you had fallen on hard times, but this is genuinely sad." "What do you want?" I managed. Vanessa sat on the edge of the bed, crossing her legs elegantly. "I want to offer you a deal. I do not want anything from you." She smiled like I had said something amusing. "You think you have won?" she said. "That is adorable. You think you found some documents, filed some motions, and now everything will work out. Derek will go to prison. You will get your precious baby back. You will live happily ever after." "That is exactly what is going to happen." Vanessa laughed. The sound was cold. "Let me tell you what is actually going to happen, Madison. You are going to drop the custody case. You are going to leave Chicago. You are going to disappear from Derek's life forever. In return, I will convince him to let you see your son twice a year. Supervised visits. Take it or leave it." I stared at her. "Why would I accept that?" "Because if you do not, I will destroy you." She pulled out her phone and turned the screen toward me. It was video footage of me, inside Derek's house, opening the safe, taking documents, breaking and entering, Vanessa said lightly. "Theft. You just handed me everything I need to put you in prison and terminate your parental rights permanently." My stomach dropped. The delivery truck. It had not been a coincidence. They had been watching. They had known I would come. "You let me take those documents," I whispered. "Of course." Vanessa's smile widened. "Derek wanted to have you arrested in the act. But I am smarter than that. I wanted you to feel hope first. Hope makes despair so much sweeter." She stood, smoothing her coat. "You have until Monday morning to decide. Drop the case or face felony charges. Your choice." She walked toward the door, then paused. "You want to know why I am doing this?" she said. "Because I was you once. Trusting. Naive. My first husband took everything. My money, my confidence, my daughter. The court sided with him because he had better lawyers. I lost custody when my baby was 2 years old. I have not seen her in 8 years. Something flickered in her eyes, something almost human. So I learned how the game works," she continued, "and I decided never again. Derek is my security. His money, his company, his reputation, they are my insurance policy. I will not let anyone take that from me, not even some crying housewife with a newborn. She opened the door. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. You are not pregnant, are you? I said. Vanessa froze. I saw the messages, I continued. Derek thinks you are carrying his child, but you are not. She turned slowly. The mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold and calculated underneath. Men believe what they want to believe, she said quietly. It is their greatest weakness and their greatest usefulness. She left. I stood alone in that motel room, staring at the closed door, feeling hope drain away, like water, through cracked hands. They had outplayed me. They had anticipated my every move, and now I had nothing. I called Garrett. I know, he said before I could finish explaining. They sent me a copy of the video, too, along with a very politely worded threat. What do we do? He was quiet for a long moment. I do not know yet, but do not give up, Madison. Not yet. Easy for him to say. He was not the one facing prison. He was not the one who might never see his child again. I hung up and sat on the edge of that stained motel bed, staring at nothing. I had tried. I had fought. I had done everything right, and it still was not enough. Monday came whether I was ready or not. I walked into that courthouse feeling like I was attending my own execution. Garrett met me in the hallway, his face grim. They submitted the video as evidence, he said, along with an affidavit from Vanessa claiming you have been harassing her for months. They are pushing for immediate dismissal of our motions and criminal charges against you. And my son. Garrett looked away. Derek's lawyers are requesting permanent custody be finalized today. Given the circumstances, I could not breathe. The hearing was a nightmare. Derek's legal team was slick, polished, prepared. They presented me as an unstable woman who had abandoned her husband, fled across state lines with his child, and then committed burglary when the courts attempted to intervene. Your Honor, Derek's lead attorney said smoothly, Mrs. Cole is clearly suffering from severe postpartum mental illness. She is a danger to herself and to the child. We ask that temporary custody be made permanent and that Mrs. Cole face appropriate criminal charges. I wanted to scream. I wanted to stand up and tell the truth about Derek, about Vanessa, about everything they had done to me. But I had no credible evidence anymore. Everything I had found had been tainted by how I obtained it. The judge looked at me with something between pity and disappointment. Mrs. Cole, do you have anything to say in your defense? I stood on shaking legs. Your Honor, everything they are saying is a lie. My husband has been having an affair. He is embezzling money. He falsified our prenuptial agreement. I only went to his house because I was trying to find proof. The judge held up her hand. Mrs. Cole, the court cannot consider evidence obtained illegally. Regardless of what that evidence might show, your actions in obtaining it were criminal. I have no choice but to grant the prosecution's motion for arrest. Two bailiffs moved toward me. Ms. Cole, you are under arrest for breaking and entering and theft. You have the right to remain silent. The handcuffs clicked around my wrists. I looked at Derek across the courtroom. He was smiling. Garrett posted my bail 3 hours later. I walked out of the detention center into gray afternoon light, feeling emptier than I had ever felt in my life. Garrett was waiting by his car. I am sorry, he said. I should have anticipated this. It is not your fault. He shook his head. I pushed you too fast. I wanted to take him down so badly that I did not protect you properly. We drove to his office in silence. I stared out the window, watching the city pass by, wondering if this was what drowning felt like. In Garrett's office, I finally let myself cry. Not the silent tears of the past few weeks. Real, ugly, sobbing that hurt my chest and made my throat raw. Garrett let me cry. He did not try to comfort me or offer empty reassurances. He just sat across from me, waiting. When I finally stopped, he slid a document across the desk. "There is something else," he said. "Something I did not want to tell you until I confirmed it." I looked at the paper. It was a medical report. "Vanessa Bennett had a hysterectomy 6 years ago," Garrett said quietly. "She cannot get pregnant. It is medically impossible." I stared at the document, the words blurred and sharpened. "She has been lying to Derek about everything." Garrett leaned forward. "She is not trying to build a family with him. She is systematically transferring his assets into her own name. She is preparing to drain him and disappear, so he does not know. He thinks he is getting a new family. He is actually getting robbed." I sat with that information for a long moment. Derek's greatest weakness had always been his ego. He could not stand being fooled. He could not tolerate looking stupid. The idea that Vanessa had been playing him this entire time would destroy him more thoroughly than any legal case ever could. "If he found out," I said slowly. "He would turn on her instantly," Garrett finished. "Derek Cole does not share money with anyone, especially someone who made him look like a fool." A dangerous idea began to form. "I am not going to fight Vanessa," I said. "I am going to make Derek destroy her for me." Garrett raised his eyebrows. "How?" "I am going to give him the truth, anonymously, and then I am going to watch them tear each other apart. That is incredibly risky." I looked at him steadily. "I have already lost everything. What else can they take from me?" Garrett studied me for a long moment, then slowly he smiled. "You know," he said, "when you first walked into my office, I thought you were just another desperate housewife who would fall apart under pressure. I was wrong. I did not feel strong. I felt broken and terrified and angry, but sometimes that is what strength looks like." I sent the medical records anonymously. No message, no explanation, just the documentation proving Vanessa Bennett could not have children, delivered to Derek's personal email from a temporary account. Then I waited. Rachel thought I was crazy. Maybe I was, but I knew Derek better than anyone. I knew how his mind worked. I knew that suspicion, once planted, would consume him. "What if it does not work?" Rachel asked during one of our nightly phone calls. "Then I am exactly where I was before. Nothing lost. You could have sent it to the police instead, to the media." "And what would that accomplish?" I countered. "The police already think I am unstable. The media would spin it into drama, not justice. Derek needs to discover this himself. He needs to feel betrayed. Then he will do my work for me." It took 8 days. Garrett had contacts inside Derek's company, people who had been quietly feeding him information for years. Through them, we learned that Derek had confronted Vanessa about the pregnancy. At first, he accepted her explanations. She was seeing a specialist. The pregnancy was complicated. She needed time before announcing it publicly, but the seed of doubt had been planted. Derek started watching her, checking her phone, following her movements. He hired a private investigator, the same one Vanessa had used to spy on me. Irony has a cruel sense of humor. The investigator confirmed what the medical records showed. Vanessa could not have children. Furthermore, she had been transferring Derek's assets into offshore accounts for over a year. The confrontation happened on a Thursday night. Garrett's contact sent us the police report the next morning. Neighbors had called 911 after hearing screaming from Derek's house. Officers found Vanessa with a cut on her forehead and Derek with scratches on his face. Both were arrested for domestic disturbance. But the real damage came from Derek's doorbell camera. In his rage, Derek had forgotten it was recording. The footage captured everything: his accusations, Vanessa's admissions, and most importantly, Derek admitting to falsifying documents, bribing inspectors, and covering up the circumstances of Marcus Thompson's death. He confessed to everything while trying to prove that Vanessa was the real criminal. Garrett received a copy of that recording from 3 different sources. Vanessa herself had sent it to him, along with the district attorney and 2 local journalists. She is trying to burn him down, Garrett explained. She knows she is caught, so she is taking him with her. I watched the footage on Garrett's laptop. Derek's face, twisted with rage, spitting out secrets he had kept buried for years. This is enough, I said. This is more than enough. Garrett was already drafting motions. The custody case, the criminal charges against you. Everything is about to change. He was right. The arrest warrant for Derek came 3 days later. The charges were extensive: fraud, bribery, involuntary manslaughter in the death of Marcus Thompson, falsifying court documents, wire fraud related to the asset transfers. Vanessa was arrested separately. Her charges included conspiracy to commit fraud, money laundering, and providing false statements to the court. I watched the news coverage from Rachel's apartment in Milwaukee. Derek's perp walk played on a loop. His perfectly styled hair was disheveled. His expensive suit was wrinkled. He looked small, broken. I did not feel satisfied. I felt empty. Is it wrong that I do not feel happy? I asked Rachel. She put her arm around me. No, that just means you are human. This was never about revenge for you. It was about getting your son back. She was right. Derek's arrest was not the ending. It was a step toward the only thing that mattered. Garrett called that afternoon. The family court is reviewing the custody case in light of the new evidence, he said. Given Derek's arrest and Vanessa's exposure, the judge has agreed to an emergency hearing tomorrow. Madison, this is it. This is your chance. I drove through the night to make it to Chicago in time. I did not sleep. I could not sleep. My son was within reach for the first time in months. Please, I whispered to no one. Please let this be over. The courtroom felt different this time. The same wood-paneled walls, the same fluorescent lighting, the same uncomfortable chairs. But the energy had shifted. The prosecutors were on my side now. The judge looked at me with something other than suspicion. Derek was not there. He was in federal custody awaiting arraignment. Vanessa was not there either. She had been denied bail, considered a flight risk. It was just me and Garrett. And the truth. The hearing lasted 2 hours. Garrett presented the evidence methodically. The falsified prenup, the fabricated psychiatric evaluation, the fraudulent custody motion, the recording that proved Derek had lied about everything. The judge listened without interruption. When Garrett finished, she removed her glasses and rubbed her eyes. Mrs. Cole, she said, I owe you an apology. I blinked. I had not expected that. This court failed you, the judge continued. We accepted documentation that should have been verified. We granted custody to a man who had no interest in his child's welfare. We arrested you for trying to protect yourself and your son. I do not blame the court, I said quietly. I blame the people who manipulated it. The judge nodded. Regardless, I want to make this right, effective immediately. Full custody of your son is awarded to you, Madison Cole. All charges against you are dismissed. And I am recommending that the district attorney investigate whether any court officials were complicit in the fraud perpetrated against you. The words washed over me like warm water. Full custody. Charges dismissed. My son. I could not speak. I could not move. I just sat there, tears streaming down my face, while Garrett squeezed my shoulder and the judge signed the paperwork that gave me my life back. The reunion happened that afternoon. I walked into the social services office where my son had been placed in foster care. The caseworker, a tired woman who had probably seen too many broken families, led me to a small room with cheerful murals on the walls. And there he was, my son, 2 months old now, bigger than when I had last held him, with my eyes and his father's chin. He was lying in a portable crib, waving his fists at the ceiling, completely unaware of everything that had happened to bring us to this moment. I picked him up. He fit against my chest like he had never left. "I am sorry," I whispered into his soft hair. "I am so sorry. It took so long. But Mommy is here now. Mommy is never leaving again." He made a small sound, not quite a cry, more like an acknowledgement. I held him and laughed, and cried some more. Rachel was waiting in the parking lot. When she saw me walking out with my son in my arms, she burst into tears. "You did it," she said, hugging me carefully so as not to crush the baby between us. "You actually did it." "We did it," I corrected. "I could not have survived this without you." We stood there in that parking lot, 2 sisters and a baby, and for the first time in months, I felt something I thought I had lost forever. Hope. Real hope. The kind that does not disappear when things get hard. 6 months passed. I moved to Milwaukee permanently, renting a small apartment 3 blocks from Rachel's building. It was nothing fancy. 1 bedroom, a tiny kitchen, a view of a brick wall. But it was mine. I paid for it with money I earned myself, working part-time at a community art center, teaching painting classes to seniors and children. It was not the life I had imagined when I married Derek Cole. It was better. My son grew. He learned to smile, to laugh, to reach for things with chubby, determined fingers. He had no memory of the chaos that surrounded his birth. To him, life was simple. Mommy was there. Auntie Rachel visited often. The world was full of interesting colors and sounds and textures to explore. I envied his innocence sometimes, but mostly I was grateful for it. Derek's trial made national news. The evidence against him was overwhelming. The recording from his doorbell camera, the testimony of employees who finally felt safe coming forward, the paper trail showing years of fraud and bribery. He was convicted on 14 counts. The sentence was 12 years in federal prison. I did not attend this sentencing. I did not need to see him again. I did not need closure or validation or revenge. I just needed him to be gone. Vanessa took a plea deal. She testified against Derek in exchange for a reduced sentence. 5 years, with possibility of parole in 3. During her testimony, she revealed something I had not known. Derek had been planning to divorce me before our son was even born. He had been working with Vanessa for over a year to ensure I would receive nothing. The affair was not just infidelity, it was a coordinated financial attack. Learning that should have hurt. Instead, it just confirmed what I already knew. I had never been a person to Derek. I had been an asset to manage, a problem to solve, an obstacle to remove. His mistake was underestimating me. Garrett visited once, about 4 months after everything ended. He looked different, lighter, like a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. "My brother is doing better," he told me over coffee at a cafe near my apartment. Knowing that Derek finally faced consequences, it helped him heal. "I am glad," I said, "and thank you for everything." "You did the hard part," Garrett said. "I just pointed you in the right direction." We talked for another hour about nothing important. The weather, his cases, my art classes, the comfortable conversation of people who had been through something difficult together and come out the other side. When he left, he shook my hand. "You have my number," he said. "If you ever need anything," I know, he hesitated, like he wanted to say something more. Then he just smiled and walked away. I watched him go, grateful for his help, but also grateful that chapter of my life was closing. I did not need a rescuer anymore. I had rescued myself. There was one more piece of unfinished business. About a month after Derek's conviction, I received a letter. It was forwarded from Garrett's office, sent by someone named Lily Chin, Vanessa's daughter. The letter was short, handwritten on plain paper. Dear Mrs. Cole, it began, I saw the news about my mother. I know she did terrible things to you. I know you have no reason to care about her or anyone connected to her, but I wanted to thank you for stopping her. I have not seen my mother since I was 8 years old. My father got custody after their divorce. He told me she was dangerous. I did not believe him for a long time. Now I understand. Part of me still wishes she had gotten help instead of becoming this. Part of me still loves her, even after everything. I do not know if that makes me stupid or just human. I hope you and your son have the peace she could never find. Lily Chen. I read the letter 3 times. Then I folded it carefully and put it in a box with other important documents. It reminded me that monsters are made, not born, that hurt people, that cycles of pain can stretch across generations, touching lives that never deserve to be damaged. It also reminded me why I had to break that cycle for my son. He would never grow up thinking manipulation was love. He would never learn that power meant controlling others. He would never believe that money was more important than kindness. I would teach him differently. I would teach him to be the kind of man Derek never was. 1 year after I walked out of that hospital with my newborn son, I received a phone call that reminded me endings are rarely final. It was early morning. My son was in his high chair, smearing banana across his face with more enthusiasm than accuracy. Rachel was attempting to make pancakes, which meant the smoke alarm would probably go off any minute. Normal life. Beautiful, ordinary, normal life. Then my phone rang. Ms. Cole, this is Detective Rivera from the Chicago Police Department. I have some news about Derek Cole. My stomach dropped. He was released early, the detective said. Overcrowding and good behavior. He served 14 months of his 12-year sentence. That is not possible, I said. 14 months. That is nothing. I know. The detective's voice was sympathetic. The system is not perfect, Ms. Cole. I am sorry. I gripped the phone tighter. There is more, he continued. He made a statement to his cellmate before release. Said he is not done with you. Silence. We have flagged him as a person of interest, the detective said. If he contacts you or comes within 500 feet of your residence, call 911 immediately. Do you understand? Yes, I said. I understand. I hung up. Rachel was watching me from the kitchen, spatula frozen in her hand. What happened? Derek is out. The words hung in the air between us. Rachel's face went through several expressions. Shock, fear, and then something harder. Determination. We are not running, she said. No, I agreed. We are not. I looked at my son, still happily destroying his breakfast, completely unaware of the shadow that had just fallen across our lives. I was not the same woman who had cried on a shelter parking lot a year ago. I was not the woman who had begged Derek to choose her. I was not the woman who had waited to be saved. I had faced the worst thing I could imagine and survived. I could survive this too. I picked up my phone and typed an email to Garrett. He is out. I am not running this time. Let us finish this. I hit send. My son looked up at me and smiled, banana smeared across both cheeks. I smiled back. Come on, baby, I said, lifting him from his high chair. Let us go meet Auntie Rachel for pancakes. Even if she burns them. Hey, Rachel protested. I am getting better. You set off the smoke alarm yesterday making toast. That toaster is possessed. I laughed. Actually laughed. Because that is what surviving looks like. Not the absence of fear, but the presence of joy despite it. Derek Cole was out of prison. He had made threats. He wanted revenge. But I had something he did not. I had a family that chose me. I had a sister who would burn pancakes for me every morning without complaint. I had a son who needed me to be strong. And I had learned something important over the past year. Something Derek never understood. Power is not about controlling others. It is about controlling yourself, your choices, your responses, your future. Derek thought he had power because he had money and connections and no conscience. But I had survived everything he threw at me. I had rebuilt my life from nothing. I had protected my son against impossible odds. That was real power. Whatever came next, I would face it. Not alone, not afraid, just ready. I carried my son to the kitchen, where Rachel was scraping burned pancake batter off the pan. "One more try," she said determinedly. "I can do this." I sat down at her small kitchen table, my son on my lap, sunlight streaming through the windows. "Take your time," I said. "We are not going anywhere." And we were not. Sometimes the story does not end when the villain falls. Sometimes it is just the beginning of a bigger fight. I did not ask for war, but I had learned I could survive it. And sometimes, surviving is exactly how you win. If this message resonates with you, I have a small request. Drop a comment below and tell me. What would you do if you discovered your partner's darkest secret? I read every single comment, and your stories inspire future content. And if you are new here, consider subscribing. We share stories like this every week. Stories that make you think, make you feel, and remind you that you are stronger than you know. Hit the like button if you believe every person deserves a second chance at happiness. Now, let us begin. Closing disclaimer. This content has been carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories and valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted with intention, designed not just to entertain, but to inspire reflection, encourage resilience, and remind you that even in the darkest moments, hope is always within reach. Thank you for being part of this community. Your support keeps these stories alive.